1 minute left, and in that, I'm going to take 30 seconds to introduce Andreas Eenfeldt. Nobody here does not know him. His dietdoctor.com website gets over 350,000 to 1 million hits per day. I don't think there is a speaker in here who has not used his slides and has not benefited from his work. And I don't want to take time away from him and tell you who he is, because he's going to come here and do it himself. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadir. Great. So I'm really excited to be here to share some practical things about low-carb diets or keto diets or ketogenic diets. I'm sure you've all heard a lot about it, but I want to perhaps share some new insights about how it can be really useful for certain things like weight loss, like reversal of type 2 diabetes and more. So I'll start with a disclosure. So me and our team, we run the health website Diet Doctor. As Nadir said, it's the largest low-carb site in the world, and the goal is to empower people by making low-carb simple. This is funded by an optional membership section. We have no ads, we take no money from industry, and we sell no products. So it's funded by the people. And also another disclosure, I eat low-carb. I've done that for quite some time now, so that's my dietary bias. I'm inclined to believe that hopefully it's not going to kill me, at least not too soon. Fairly confident about that. So this chart is online searches for keto diet in the last few years. It's probably the most popular sort of dietary treatment for health or weight loss online at the moment. So I'm sure you've all seen news about it. And the idea is, I mean, it's a strict low-carb diet, meaning you're supposed to avoid carbohydrates to get that sort of effect that you could get from a keto diet. Meaning you will eat things like this, perhaps, like natural fats, meat, fish, vegetables, eggs, and so on, while avoiding large amounts of carbohydrates, like these kind of foods, bread, beer, potatoes, pasta, and so on. And I think the common sort of perception in some people, probably not so many people here, but outside of here, is that, well, then you're eating loads of bacon, and then you're having coffee with butter in it in the morning. And, you know, some people do that. I'm not sure I would recommend basing your diet on this, but it's possible. It's certainly low carb, but it doesn't have to be like that. So this is also a ketogenic low carb diet, potentially a Caesar salad. Let's get rid of the croutons. This is a keto diet, potentially. It's not pasta, though. You'll have to replace it with something else. I think in this case it's cream cheese and eggs, and or you could maybe slice up some aubergine, put it in there, really good. This is keto. This is keto also. Plenty of eggs in there, I can promise you that. Here's a classic breakfast, bacon and eggs, if you do want bacon. So in a way, it's almost completely the opposite of conventional dietary advice, because you're supposed to not eat meat. You're supposed to eat your whole grains, eat your fruit 5 times a day, and so on. And this is like, no, not like that. It's very different. So maybe that's a good thing, though, because looking back, you could tell this story in many ways, but we start in 1984. 1984 is the year that George Orwell wrote about in his novel about Big Brother. In the same year, the American government started with, a renewed sense of certainty, telling people how to think about food. So you're supposed to fear eggs. You're supposed to fear meat or fat or cholesterol, because cholesterol is supposed to give you a heart attack, right? And that's what I believed back then, and that's what a lot of people believed. But there really wasn't any good scientific evidence to prove that this was a good idea. It's just a belief. And the thing that people might have kind of predicted, perhaps, if they had been very smart, is that there could be a hidden danger in this. Because when you tell people to fear all these kinds of natural foods, people will likely get hungrier. And they will have to eat something else, which is carbohydrates. Because most of the energy in our foods comes from fat or carbohydrates. So more carbohydrates. And I think a lot of people thought, okay, they will eat kale and broccoli. It's going to be great. But you know that's not the kind of carbohydrates you easily find wherever you go. So instead, you might find low-fat products full of sugar, full of processed carbohydrates. That's what's easy to get. So this is obesity statistics from the US. I think a lot of people have seen this. I have actually updated these slides with the absolutely newest data from last year. So this is back in 1985, after this campaign was launched, after people started getting afraid of fat, eating more sugar and carbs instead. Obesity levels were close to 10%. Let's move ahead a few years to 91. And you see a new color, dark blue, which is over 15% obesity. That's quite a jump from 10 to 15% in a few years. 97, a new color, yellow, over 20% obesity. 03, orange color, over 25% obesity. 2009, the brown color, over 30%. 2015, yes, another color, the dark color here, over 35% obesity. So, has it stopped? Or is it still going on? Here's 2017, worse than ever. Just keeps getting worse. So, in just one generation, 3 times more obesity. It's pretty crazy. So, a lot of people in America have this issue now. A lot of kids have this issue. And if you look at the obesity chart of the world, sort of all the different countries, you see the United States at the top. So America has been made great, at least in size. The heavyweight champion of the world, showing the way for the rest of us. Sweden is where I'm from, is down close to the bottom with only 12% obesity, which means that 88% of Swedes still look like this. Not entirely sure if it's a good thing, but... So 3 times more obesity in one generation. Of course, it's not just about obesity, because there is other health issues that sort of come with this epidemic. And one of them is diabetes type 2. So let's look at diabetes, what happened to that. It started in the 60s at around 2% of the adult population. And then we got the dietary guidelines for Americans. And then something happened. Of course, it's correlation is not causation. We don't know what caused what here. Maybe nothing caused anything, but it doesn't really look like it helped much, these sort of low-fat, high-carb dietary guidelines. And of course, diabetes is a disease where you have too much sugar in the blood. And the sugar in the blood comes from the carbohydrates that you eat. So there could be a connection. This idea that eggs are dangerous, that fat is dangerous, never had much scientific support, if any. And if we look at it today, if you look at all the evidence that we've collected over the decades, it's sort of worse than ever. If you look at all statistical studies where you try to correlate things, you see no evidence that there is even a correlation that, people who eat a lot of butter, they seem to get the same amount of heart disease as other people. People who avoid it, they get the same amount of heart disease. Doesn't seem to be even a correlation there. And if you look at all the interventional studies where you actually test this, where you randomize people to 2 groups and try to get one group to eat less fat, and then you combine all these studies, you see there is, again, no evidence. And the conclusion of this sort of review of all the evidence says that removing SFA, meaning saturated fats, and replacing them with other fats is unlikely to reduce heart disease mortality, or total mortality. And they say that these findings have implications for current dietary recommendations. And the implication, I would say, is that current dietary recommendations are wrong. It's time to change them. So, and that's not just what I'm saying. Of course, a lot of people are saying the same thing now. Even Time magazine put up this cover a couple of years ago saying, eat butter. Scientists labeled fat the enemy. Why they were wrong. All right, so change of topic. What does keto mean? Keto in keto diet. Well, it means ketogenic, or something that creates ketones. And ketones are these little energy molecules that you would find in the blood of people who eat a very strict low-carb diet. And they have these fancy names, and they're basically energy, just like sugar is energy, or fat can be energy. And the point is that if you stop eating sugar or carbohydrates, the body will switch and eat more and sort of burn more fat, like you could get from these kind of foods. And the body can burn the fat, but the brain cannot burn fat directly. So fat is converted in the liver into these little energy molecules called ketones that fuel the brain. So the entire body becomes fueled mostly by fat. And the brain is a really hungry organ. So if you want to lose weight, if you want to burn fat, it's a great thing. You could actually, just relax and let your brain burn lots of fat for you without even having to work especially hard doing it, of course. I'm not saying that exercise is bad. It's a good thing, but it's nice to have a bonus, sort of. And this is sort of extra credit if you learn how these can transform into each other and so on. Not necessary. Anyway, so a keto diet, you hear it in the media all the time, and a lot of people are sharing these stories about how they improved their health. This man, Lance, he got rid of his epilepsy, or at least he has it completely under control on a keto diet, also lost weight. Here's another woman who did great. She felt on keto. But it's not really about just stories, because there are a lot of high-quality studies done on this. So that the best scientific evidence that we can produce at the moment is called the randomized controlled trial, where you, by chance, divide people into 2 groups, and you let one group learn how to do a low-carb or ketogenic diet, and another group does something else. And then you compare how they do. And there's been dozens of these studies, and the Public Health Collaboration in the UK, they did a review of all these studies to see how many times did the low-carb group actually lose more weight? And how many times, when you compare it to a low-fat group, did they lose more weight? And here's the results. For low-carb, there were 31 studies showing statistically significant more weight loss. On low-fat, there were no studies showing more weight loss. So that's interesting. That seems like a pretty clear winner. And yet, when you look in the media, earlier this year, you could hear that low-carb diets are actually no better than a traditional focus on fat. That's strange. What about those 31 studies? Well, the thing is that there are also a number of studies where you couldn't find a clear winner. So what happened was we got another study where there was no clear winner. But you can think of it like a football game or whatever. You have one team winning 30 times, and then there is a draw 30 times, and the other team wins never ever. Which team would you bet on? But it's interesting, in the media it's like, okay, low carb wins, we can say that low carb wins, and then when it's a draw, it's low carb does not win. And then it feels like it's 50-50. But it's not really. Of course, if you're scientifically schooled, you know that this is not a sports game, so you're supposed to do it in a different way. You're supposed to combine everything in a systematic meta-analysis, and that's been done many, many times, and it basically always showed the same thing. Participants, like in this one from a couple of years ago, participants on low-carb diets experienced a greater reduction in body weight. If you combine all these studies together, you also get some improvement in triglycerides, HDL, but the LDL, the so-called bad cholesterol, goes up by about 6 milligrams per deciliter on average. We'll get back to that. It's kind of interesting. So this guy, Peter, he sort of reversed his type 2 diabetes, lost a lot of weight. But maybe his LDL went up by 6 milligrams per deciliter. So should he go back and do what he did before? Or Judy here, she also got off all her diabetes drugs. But maybe her LDL got up by 6 milligrams per deciliter. Or Peter here, Kenneth, another Peter, who also reversed his type 2 diabetes. Pretty impressive. But there is always this sort of thing, could it be dangerous to do this? Would they be better off where they were? And also, the question is this sustainable? Can this last? Because often you hear in the media, sure, low-carb diet works fine for a short time, but in the long term, the weight comes back. So does it? How long can this last? Eric Westman is going to speak tomorrow morning, I think. He did this study about 10 years ago comparing a very low-carb diet to a low glycemic index diet for type 2 diabetes. And after 6 months, the low-carb diet group did a lot better in different ways. So it seems it can work for 6 months. Here's an interesting study about type 2 diabetes that came out this year, done by Verta Health and Sarah Hallberg. A lot better results after 12 months on blood glucose. Also, quite an impressive weight loss curve that you can see here, minus something like 13% of the body weight after a year. It seems to work after a year. Here's a study that is almost 4 years long on type 2 diabetes, where the participants are doing much better after 4 years. So that's pretty good. But there is also this tendency that people often regain weight after a while in these studies on average. So why is that? Here's a common example that people often refer to is in a study from Israel published in the New England Journal of Medicine from 10 years ago. And people were randomized to 3 different diet groups, and what you see here is how much weight they lost on average over 2 years. And the purple line is the low-carb group. They lost the most in the beginning, but then it seems like after about 6 months here, the weight starts going up again. So did it stop working there? Maybe it did. However, when you read the study, you can see that they initially told people to try to stay below 4% of energy from carbohydrates. And then after half a year, they asked people what they ate, and they answered that on average, they were eating 41% carbohydrates. So it seems like it's terribly unfair, but it seems like low-carb diets don't work when you don't eat low carb. That's really bad, actually. Terrible. So, but the thing is, what you do in these studies is you take people, a large group of people who volunteer to do a weight loss study, but then you roll the dice or something else random and you divide them into different groups. And in this case, you might be told to eat a low-fat diet or a low-carb diet or a Mediterranean diet, and nobody knows what's best, because that's what the study is going to show. So you're just supposed to eat the way the dice told you to eat for 2 years without anybody telling you that this is the best diet. It's just a diet. So would you do that? Would you go home and faithfully, cook and eat a low-carb diet or a low-fat diet or a Mediterranean diet for a month, every meal? Would you do it for 6 months? Or would you perhaps try to gravitate sort of back to your old habits and forget about that? I think that's what most people do, actually. But back to this question, this terrible unfair thing that once you stop doing it, it stops working. I mean, should we really be surprised about that? Isn't that the case for anything you do when it comes to lifestyle? Like smoking. Let's say you have asthma and you smoke, and someone tells you, if you stop smoking, it's going to be much better for your breathing. And you stop smoking. And yeah, your breathing gets a lot better. But then you start again. And you get back to where you were. Would you then say to people that, I tried that stopping smoking thing? Nah, just works short term, It doesn't work long term. As soon as I started smoking again, the problem came back. You wouldn't say that. How about another silly example? What if you start going to the gym every day and you train super hard and you get lots of muscle and you feel great, and then you stop going to the gym and the muscles start to disappear and you're not as fit anymore? Would you then say that I did try that exercise thing, but it only works short term, doesn't work long term? As soon as I stopped, it stopped working. Or just to make it super silly, what if you try this showering thing and you get all clean and then you stop showering and a few days later or a week later, a month later, you're really dirty. It's like, I tried this shower thing, but it's just like they say, it only works short term. If you stop, it doesn't work. Basically, it's the same thing for all lifestyles, right? But for low carb, in the media and even for a lot of experts, it seems like if people stop doing it and it stops working, it means the diet doesn't work. Sort of like if you would say that showering doesn't work long term, only short term. Because this is what happens in these long-term randomized trials, that people gravitate back to what they had before. However, there is perhaps a way around this. If you go to these studies, like this Hallberg study, where it seems like, hey, this is a weight loss curve and it's not going up after a year. It just stays down there. But this is not a randomized trial. You haven't had to, roll the dice and follow whatever the dice told you to eat. In this case, people selected themselves. Yes, I want to do this. And the doctors say, this is right for you. This is what we want you to do. This is perfect for you, and we're going to support you in this if you want to do it. And then it seems it can work long term. And we know they actually ate a low-carb diet because they tested the ketone levels in the blood, and people had elevated ketones. So we know people were on a low-carb diet for a year on average. And it seems if you do it long term, it works long term. Just like exercise or whatever. So how long can it work? Is a long-term cure of type 2 diabetes or obesity possible if you keep doing it? I have some really good experience from my 5 or 8 years perhaps working with patients with this. But I asked someone who has much more experience, Dr. Ted Nyman. He's a family physician from Seattle. And he's been working in the same clinic for 15 years, treating patients with low-carb diets. And he says that he has numerous patients who have cured or totally reversed their type 2 diabetes long-term. And when he says cured, it means that they are off all medications and they have completely normal blood glucose levels for at least a year. And then he sort of removes this diagnosis and says, it's a cure. And that happens, he says, with some regularity. He also told me something else that's kind of interesting. He said that for people who just do a low-carb diet, they, in his experience, they basically have to stay very low-carb forever to keep having this great effect. But if people do a low-carb diet and they add a lot of exercise, then they tend to be able to eat some more carbs and still keep the blood glucose levels normal. So that's interesting, I think. Here's another man, Dr. Jay Wortman. He got type 2 diabetes 16 years ago. And he reversed it on low carb, still off all medications with a normal A1C. Seems like he's doing some exercise though, that picture. So maybe that's it as well. Side effects. Are there any side effects from this? Or is it just, perfect? Well, there are side effects, at least from a strict low-carb diet or ketogenic diet. You can have some common side effects, especially in the first week. But it can happen later as well. So I'm going to go through these briefly. The keto flu, probably a lot of you have experienced that. The first week, people get often headache, feel tired, feel irritable. And often the cure can be to get enough water and salt, because you tend to lose extra fluid and salt in the first week. And this actually can happen after many months and even years as well. Maybe not so much, but if you have a cup of bouillon, for example, extra salt, it usually takes care of this, or most of it. Leg cramps is something that a lot of people can experience, at least in the beginning, also due to a loss of minerals, and again, water, salt, possibly magnesium, usually can take care of it. Constipation can happen, also often due to dehydration, maybe because some people eat less fiber on a low-carb diet. Again, water, salt, fiber, milk of magnesia, if necessary. Most people don't get it, but a few people definitely do. And another thing that can happen is bad breath, or at least ketones in the breath. So that's acetone that can be smelled. It's sort of a fruity smell that can remind people of nail polish remover. So this is something that is most common in the beginning, and it's often temporary, goes away. Breath freshener can be helpful. Some people can have it long term, and then the best idea if you want to get rid of it is to eat a bit more carbs, and then it goes away. Of course, the effect of a low-carb diet also gets a little bit less, so you'll have to sort of balance it, if that's the case. But for most people, it's not an issue after maybe first week. Heart palpitations, some people get that, especially in the beginning. Can also be due to dehydration, maybe some stress hormones in the beginning. Usually temporary, water and salt can help. Reduced physical performance, definitely the first couple of weeks, but it can go on for a bit longer. It's usually temporary as the muscles adapt to burning fat for energy instead of sugar. Again, very important to get enough water and salt. And if needed, some targeted carbs before competitions, for example, can be useful. So those are the common side effects, usually initial side effects on low carb. But there are some more that some people might be concerned about, like cholesterol. How about those 6 milligrams? It's usually not an issue, because it's usually no elevation or a very minor elevation. But and the typical thing is actually an improvement where the good cholesterol goes up, which is a really good thing, and triglycerides goes down. So that's just good from a statistical perspective. But a few percent, maybe 5% of people, maybe less, maybe what's called hyper-responders and get a very high level of this LDL. And that is actually something that is currently unknown, whether that is something to be concerned about or not, because it hasn't been studied in this particular circumstance. But just to be safe, or if you're worried about it, there are some ways to mitigate this. Maybe not drink bulletproof coffee, this butter in coffee kind of thing. That can be enough to take care of it. Otherwise, maybe have some less saturated fats and more olive oil, for example. Intermittent fasting can help. And if necessary, if you really want to get your LDL levels down, if you are one of these few people, well, you can always eat more carbs, less fat. But then again, you reduce the effect of a low-carb diet. So that's that. How about this side effect? Can you die from a low-carb diet? Can it shorten your life? You may think so after reading the media. So this is from just a couple of months ago, actually. Low-carb diets could shorten life, studies suggests. All right, what kind of study is this? Because actually all the studies I know of where you actually test a low-carb diet has not, to my knowledge, ever shown that there are more deaths in any group. But this study was not really on people who actually ate low carb, but was on the general population. It's this kind of statistical study where you try to find correlations. The problem with these studies is that they basically cannot say what's cause and effect. You can't know. So you get these statistical correlations. They could be due to anything, really. So to really believe them, they have to be very, very strong. For example, people who smoke get lung cancer about 1,000% more often than people who don't smoke. That's a pretty impressive sort of risk elevation. And I'm inclined to believe that it's actually true. But you sort of need at least a doubling of the risk to really believe it. So how much was the risk elevated here? Actually 1.2. It's a 20% risk increase. It's so small, in fact, that it's very hard to know what it's about. Because these people who eat less carbs, they're actually not following the guidelines. So what else happens? What else is true about people who don't follow guidelines? Well, it turns out that they don't follow other health guidelines either. They smoke more. They don't exercise. They do all kinds of dangerous things. So how do we know that it's because of eating slightly fewer carbs? Not a low-carb diet, but slightly fewer carbs. And the answer is we don't know. There's no way to know. Absolutely not. And in fact, this is the reason why there is so much confusion today with these newspaper headlines saying one thing one day and the complete opposite may seem like the next day. It's because they're all based on these sort of statistical exercises where you can basically find anything and prove whatever you want if you look in the right place. And a lot of people are saying that this is really, really bad science. So this guy, for example, Professor John Ioannidis, he said recently that nutritional epidemiology, which is this kind of science, is a scandal. It should just go to the waste bin. So who is this John? Well, he's the professor of medicine and health research at Stanford University. Also professor of statistics at Stanford University. That's a pretty smart guy, I think. Or this guy, who also knows a thing or two about this, he says, I never believe any headline that says X foodstuff is associated with Y outcomes in health terms, because the science is almost always rubbish. And I think they're right. And we shouldn't believe that kind of science because, you can prove anything about anything with that kind of science. But there are real side effects that would have to be balanced between versus the health benefits you may get on a low-carb diet, like weight loss, like reversal of type 2 diabetes, like reversal of high blood pressure, like improvement in PCOS, like improvements in epilepsy, like improvement in IBS. Many things can get better. So then, you'll have to say, I want to try that to see if I can get better. And then you'll see, is it worth it for you? Only you can tell. Here's another thing. Do you need a lot of fancy supplements to do a low-carb or ketogenic diet? Do you need these MCT oils? Do you need ketone supplements? I would say that you don't. There's actually no good evidence of any kind that it would help you, for example, lose weight or reverse diabetes, or even, performance-wise, it's very unclear whether it really helps. We actually did an experiment with some co-workers of mine. 6 people had got to try this placebo-controlled in our office, and we couldn't find any clear, benefit. So if there is a benefit, it's not huge, gotta say. And there's no other evidence saying it's great either. So I would just suggest to not waste money on that and buy some great food instead. Much better way to spend your money. That's all you need really is real food to do this. So getting towards the end, I thought I was just going to share a little bit of my story with low carb. I got really interested in it back in 2002 when I was 2 years out of med school. I was working as a family doctor for a number of years, and the thing that I find fascinating now is I was treating patients, often patients with type 2 diabetes or high blood pressure or obesity, and nobody really got better. So what happened is usually you get a new patient and they're a little bit sicker than last year, and you give them a little bit more drugs and you say bye-bye, and then a year later they come back and you repeat the same thing. But this wasn't strange. It seemed like this is just what everybody was doing. But then I found a few books about low glycemic index diets, and I got really interested in this because it made perfect logical sense to me that this seems like it could work. And yet, everybody says, or most experts said, this is just a fad diet. It's just stupid. So I started reading some science to try to understand this, and that's when I got really hooked, because the science I found seemed to say that this actually does work, and yet nobody is talking about it. So I tried it myself, and hey, it worked for me. I lost, all the excess weight I'd put on since being 20, and my family and friends tried it and worked great. And then I thought, hey, I'm actually going to try this on a few patients, selected patients like people with diabetes, for example. And that's when I got really hooked, because when they came back, suddenly they were like younger, or at least healthier instead of sicker, which is quite a difference. Suddenly I could remove drugs instead of adding drugs. Suddenly, actually, my patients started to bring me gifts, which I think had never happened before, with some regularity. And I think I'm onto something. And I read, actually, Gary Taubes is going to speak after me. And I'd read a few of his things, the New York Times article and the Science article, and I found it super interesting. And then then I got his Good Calories, Bad Calories book when it was released, and that's when I really started to understand how everything fit together. I remember reading it, trying to finish a patient quickly so I could read a few pages of this book, to finish it within a few days. It's a thick book, but I finished it in a few days. And then I thought, hey, I'm going to have to write something in Swedish about this, because not many Swedes are going to be able to get through that book. It's a thick book, and we need something thinner and in Swedish. So I started writing that book, and while I was writing it, I started a blog in Swedish called Kostdoktorn, which means diet doctor in Swedish. And it's been an exciting journey for me. I mean, I didn't really know anything about writing when I started, and a lot of people write better than me, obviously. Also, a lot of people dress better than me, which might be important, because a lot of blogs back then, this is 2007, they were about the sort of daily outfits of the person writing. So this is Kinsa. She's the most famous blogger in Sweden, the one with the most visitors. So I thought, hey, if I do the same thing, I'm going to get lots of visitors. That was a bit of a failed experiment, actually. So it didn't work. I had to go back to writing about what I knew about boring stuff, like diet and health and stuff. But still, after a month, there were 500 people visiting every day. And I thought, wow, this is pretty fantastic. Instead of talking to one person at a time, I get to speak to 500 people. How great. And a year later, 5,000. And a few years later, 50,000 people a day in Swedish. So, yeah, that was an exciting journey. So I started going to these conferences, meeting these great people like Gary, like Eric, other people, and learning more about this. And then I thought, hey, there's really nothing great in English. This is back in 2011. There's lots of great things now. But I thought, I'm going to start an English site as well. So I did. It's called Diet Doctor. And a few years ago, we were a few people working part-time or freelance doing this. And I had to sort of make a decision, because I was working in this health clinic still part-time, seeing one patient at a time, which is fantastic. Still some of the most gratifying experiences of my life, seeing what people manage to do on a low-carb diet. But one person at a time, if you think that maybe there's a way to help 10 people in that time, maybe 100 people, maybe potentially thousands of people. So after thinking about this for years, I decided I'm actually gonna quit this job and only do the online thing, at least for a while, to see if it works. So I did that, and I don't think I've regretted it really. I miss it sort of, but it's been even more exciting, because instead of 50,000 people, now it's like 400,000 people per day. And we started this membership to support it, because we didn't want to have ads or sell products. So we stopped doing all that and only had this voluntary optional membership, which is like Netflix or Spotify, where you get a free month if you like, and if you stay, it's $9 a month after that. Now we got over 50,000 people supporting us. So instead of, and we're using everything to build this company to do great and exciting things. So instead of a few people working part-time, now we're 40 people working with this, 23 people full-time. It's really exciting to me to see what we can hopefully do together. This is a fantastic team that have joined this thing. And so this has made it possible to produce lots of free resources online. You don't have to join, you can just use this. For example, free guides to low carb and keto, free news. Hey, cardiologist in Houston Chronicle. And it's not Nadir. Who could it be? He's going to be here too. It's Brett Scher. He's going to speak as well. Yes, and it's in Spanish. Do you know anybody who speaks Spanish? It's now in Spanish. So, and there's hundreds, well, 600, 700, I think, recipes online. This is the most popular recipe, which is ironic, I guess. The second most popular recipe, can it be? Yes, pizza. There's no flour, only almond flour, actually. 600 success stories, with amazing stories that people have sent. These visual guides that you can check out, what kind of vegetables are low carb or keto. All of this stuff, by the way, is free. How many people are doctors in here? Can you raise your hand? Quite a few people. So we're building this resource, a free resource for doctors who want to learn how to do low carb in a safe and effective way. So you can use it. We have a video series with this amazing gentleman, Dr. David Unwin from the UK, teaching you how to do low carb safely and effectively with your patients. Eric Westman, Sarah Hallberg, and other people are also there teaching healthcare professionals how to do this. And lots of videos for other people as well. Let's see. And meal plans and shopping lists, etc., leaflets to print, if you like. And really, this is what it is all about. I'm going to show you a little video of what can happen.
My energy increased. I was able to sleep.
I got off the medications that I had been on for 20 plus years for high blood pressure.
2014, beginning of 2015, I was off all my medications.
That hunger that I had for my entire life wasn't there.
Her energy level, and much like mine, our mental well-being has improved as much as our physical health.
I went from 374 pounds to 139 pounds.
I lost 200 pounds in roughly 18 months.
The real freedom was the emotional freedom, not having to crave and not having these blood sugar dips and spikes.
I now take 0 medication, and I was on 4 different types of tablets, maybe 6 tablets a day.
I feel like work-wise, I can be more focused on projects and get through projects better.
I feel absolutely free of IBS now. It's good.
My life was transformed by it.
I would have never believed that within my lifespan, I would have my life back like this.
It's pretty amazing. I just want to mention that Stephen Bennett, who's in the theater, was in that video. Thank you, Stephen. Two and a half years ago. Still looking fantastic. So, just going to say before I end, though, that a low-carb or a keto diet is not for everybody. Not everybody needs it, clearly not, and not everybody wants to do a low-carb or ketogenic diet. It can be hard to do, but it can also be really powerful in certain situations, like for weight loss, like for type 2 diabetes reversal, like for high blood pressure and certain other conditions. So, if you're interested in this, if you want to learn more, if you want to start a low-carb diet, or if you want to make it simpler to keep doing it, I hope that we can make it simpler for you. Thank you. So, I don't know if we have time for a few questions or if it's Gary time, maybe.
We have 10 minutes for questions.
So, how do we do the questions?
So, the questions, you can come up to the
microphone.
You can come up to the microphone right up there. You can line up and ask questions.
All right, the other side.
While they're circling back up here, Bill Aminet has made sure that we have keto pizza with the same recipe from dietdoctor.com.
It's fantastic. Famous Fathead Pizza, it's by Tom Norton. Yes, a lot of people know that.
Bill, go ahead.
Seems to work. You early on showed a graph where you had healthiest outcomes for like Sweden and Italy and Switzerland. So my question is, how have you been able to influence the guidelines for schools and government workers and things like that in Sweden?
Oh, how we have been able to implement the guidelines in Sweden. Unfortunately, the guidelines in Sweden are very, very similar to the guidelines everywhere, the official dietary recommendations. It's basically the same. We're just copying you guys. So I think it's all right. So I think what's going to happen or has to happen for the rest of the world to change is for Washington to change. So, which is a hard thing to do, but it will happen eventually. It's just a question of, is it going to take 5 years or 50 years? Nina Teicholz, of course, is working hard to make sure it's 5 years. So if you want to support that, you can go to the nutritioncoalition.com or .org and sign up as a supporter. I think they can really do great things to make it happen much faster.
Yeah, I'm a physician, and I'm reading a lot about the microbiome. And with this radical change of diet, you'd wonder about the microbiome changing very much in this. Has anyone looked into the possibility that some of these things are actually changes in the patient's microbiome?
Mm-hmm. So what happens to the microbiome if you eat a low-carb diet?
Yes.
So I mean, every dietary change is gonna change the microbiome. I think it's a lot about eating a very varied diet. If you want to have a sort of many different kinds of bacteria in your gut, you may want to have quite a varied diet, and you may want to eat plenty of vegetables. In that case, like non-starchy vegetables, you could still do a low-carb diet and have a lot of nice bugs in your stomach. If you think that's important, I mean, it's still controversial.
Yeah, the fact that it works for IBS is very interesting. That would be a big factor in that. Anyway.
Yeah, so it works. It seems to work quite well for IBS, and maybe it's because a lot of people eat less fiber, which can actually be a good thing for some people if they have problem with gas and cramping and so on. If you eat less fiber, some people get better. It can be worth trying. Even if it's the opposite again of common advice. Yes?
I'm a pediatrician, and I do see this obesity just going crazy. We do screen everything, but then again, are there any studies in pediatric population that I can apply the same thing for them?
Are there any studies for pediatric populations? There are a couple of studies at least. I think people are like 12 or above or something like that. I can give you the links to those studies, randomized controlled trials showing a good effect. So down to that sort of age group, there are good studies. Younger than that, I don't think there are, except for epilepsy studies and so on.
I see from 4-year-old, 95 percentile, 99 percentile BMI. So your website is great. So is there a way I can use it from my website, a link, so that they can go and
Oh, sure. If you want a link from your website to Diet Doctor, feel free to do so.
Okay, I'll talk to you.
That's great.
Okay.
Let's talk more.
Thank you.
Hello, Eric.
Thank you, Andreas. I'm Dr. Eric Westman at Duke University, and wow. So one guideline has changed, and that's the Obesity Medicine Association guideline. It's the largest group of doctors who treat obesity and diabetes, or specifically obesity, but we treat diabetes as well. That guideline has included the keto diet in it. And you were invited to our meeting just last month, I believe it was, and you were on the panel with Dr. Osner from Miami, a cardiologist there. I wonder what your impressions were. There are lots of changes occurring among doctors in the U.S., and you don't have to wait for the governmental guideline to change what you eat, is what I got from your talk here. But what were your impressions of coming to our meeting in D.C.?
Thank you, Eric, for inviting me. I think it was great. I really enjoyed. So that was a conference, I think 800 people, mostly doctors. Very, very friendly reception, I feel. And dozens and dozens of doctors coming up saying that they use low carb with their patients who have obesity to treat obesity with great effect. So I do think things are starting to change. And those people are doctors who are specialized in obesity treatment. And a lot of them know that low carb is possibly the most effective diet to do that, it seems like.
Hello, doctor. I'm Patty McGoy, and I'm a community member and a patient of Dr. Ali's. My question for you is, how sustainable is keto eating? Because it's like eating from the top of the food chain. And what if we get 7 billion people on the planet all looking for grass-fed beef?
It's a great question. I would start by saying I don't think 7 billion people need to eat a keto diet, fortunately. It's more of a diet that is meant for people who need it for health reasons. Secondly, I would say that it's not necessary to eat more meat to eat a keto diet. The important thing is to switch from eating a lot of carbohydrates to eating more energy from fat. So the protein or the meat can stay the same or even go down. Some people eat a vegetarian keto diet, and that's possible. Thirdly, I would say it's really a lot about how we produce meat, how we raise our animals and treat them. If 7 billion people cannot eat grass-fed meat, but they don't need to either. It doesn't have to be for 7 billion people. It just has to be for the people who benefit from it the most. So, yeah, all those things. Keto is for the people who need it, not for everybody. Most people can keep eating carbs and do fairly fine as long as they avoid the worst carbs and processed food. I think it can work. Mm-hmm. And then really working hard at like regenerative agriculture, spreading that to more places. Actually, animals that graze on grass and walk around, they tend to result in actually reduced global warming effect because carbon gets bound into thicker and thicker soils because of what cows do when they walk around. So the soil sort of builds up.
Sounds good.
I think you're going to hear all about it.
Just one last question, please.
Yes.
One last.
Hi, Andreas. I'm Gigi from Norway. So I have a question. Why is it so much focus on low carb for treating type 2 diabetes and not type 1 when it clearly helps for type 1 also? My son has type 1 and we have reduced our carbohydrates in the whole family, very much inspired by you and Dietdoktoren. And it really has helped us to get an easier life with diabetes.
Yes, so why the big focus on type 2 and not type 1 when it can help stabilize blood sugar levels and reduce other issues in type 1? I think you're right. I think it's going to be huge in type 1 diabetes as well. One of the reasons, I guess, is just that there are so many more people with type 2 diabetes, like 10 times more people. Doesn't mean that a person with type 1 diabetes is any less important, but 10 people is perhaps more important than one person to start with. Also, I think people with type 1 diabetes doesn't necessarily have to stay on a keto diet. Some do great, and some want to, but some can control their blood glucose levels with a moderate amount of carbs as well. So I think it should definitely be an option, and people should learn about it and know about it.
Because they don't have to take so much insulin.
Yes, you can take less insulin. So I think it's a great option for a lot of people if people want to do it. And at least they should have that as an option.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you, Andreas.